Good morning, everyone. How are you on this cold day? Good. My name is Beverly Hutton. I'm the Deputy Executive Director at NASSP, the National Association of Secondary School Principals. And I'm delighted to welcome you to this very important event, this morning's panel discussion about amplifying student voice and engagement in the political process. NASSP is best known as an organization of and for school leaders, but student voice and student empowerment are central to our work. Soon after NASSP was founded in 1916, the Board of Directors decided to create a platform for students to recognize them and to give them a structure in the school for voice. And that was the genesis of National Honor Society, then National Junior Honor Society, and then some years later, National Student Council. And NASSP remains the home of those programs, and our understanding of student empowerment continues to evolve. Efforts that were once peripheral or considered extracurricular are becoming more and more central to the purpose of education that happens to students, and we are committed to empowering them to lead their own education, acquiring the essential skills and knowledge in the context of solving problems that matter to them. And these students have certainly been telling us over the last few days what matters to them. We're getting closer to models of education driven not by the question, what will be on the test, but by questions like, what can I do? What good can I do in the world? And how can I make a difference? And that brings us to today's event. The young people on the panel are all members of NASSP's newest student initiative, the Student Leadership Advisory Committee, comprised of 15 students and educators from all across the country. In fact, all of those members of the committee are here today. Those of you who are not on the panel, could you please stand up so we can acknowledge you? Thank you for your work. Thank you for your work. For the past several years, the committee has led work around a national initiative called Making Global Change, built around 3 strands of engagement, empowerment, and equity. This initiative has mobilized thousands of students across the country to engage in activities in their schools and communities around those 3 areas. All of the members of the committee are here today, but you'll hear from 3 of the students and 1 of the principals during the panel discussion who will describe the kinds of activities that they've been engaged in to make global change. More specifically, you will learn how their generation views civic engagement, which is shaping the American political landscape. But before we go to the panel, we do have a special guest today, and we're joined by a speaker whose work has carefully examined the intersection of education and civic engagement. Loren Bauer, a fellow in economic studies at the Brookings Institution, holds a PhD in human development and social policy. Her research focuses on social and safety net policies, as well as civic engagement and political behavior. She is a member of the New York City's Office of Community Schools Research Advisory Council and has served in research positions with political campaigns, and as a special assistant in the Office of the Secretary at the U.S. Department of Education. Please welcome Dr. Loren Bauer.
Thank you, Dr. Hutton. And thank you to the National Association of Secondary School Principals for calling attention to this critical topic and inviting me to participate alongside these exceptional student and school leaders. As an 8th grader at a small, diverse, and under-resourced middle school in the Pittsburgh public school system, I took my first independent civic action. I organized our school to get its first 2 student-use computers, which I realize dates me tremendously. I still have the letter that I wrote describing how we were going to raise the money, how to involve the school community, and why we considered this an issue of equity. This action and the letter itself was signed off on and supported by the school's principal, and it was a National Junior Honor Society project. There is not a single setting during which students learn about politics, the skills of participation, or develop a sense of civic identity or citizenship. Learning can happen anywhere, but the school context is critical. Before turning to direct civic education, I want to make clear that literacy, numeracy, and social and emotional learning are civic education too. My own research on the relationship between access to early childhood education and later political behavior, for example, shows that Head Start, the federally funded preschool program, causes greater political engagement decades later among certain participants. Why? Because Head Start increases cognitive and social skills, which in turn increase key attributes of engagement. And the evidence base overall suggests that additional education, whether early childhood education or high school completion, for example, cause greater political participation. Now, civic education is a strategy for increasing political participation by teaching directly to the knowledge and skills that prepare a student for citizenship. There are many best practices in civic education, the most promising of which center on combining democratic knowledge with democratic practice. The 10 best practices developed from national convenings are classroom instruction in civics, government, history, law, economics, and geography, and I would add statistics, discussion of current events, service learning, extracurricular activities, student participation in school governance, simulations of democratic processes and procedures, media literacy, action civics, social emotional learning, and school climate reform. Every state has standards for civics, and 42 states and the District of Columbia require students to have taken at least one course related to civic education in order to graduate. But states vary tremendously in terms of what standards they set for civic knowledge and skills. A report released last year by my colleagues at Brookings, Mike Hansen, Elizabeth Levesque, John Vallant, and Diana Quintero, looked at how states have incorporated certain of these best practices in civic education. They found, either in their high school graduation requirements or in their standards and curriculum frameworks, that every state includes discussions of current events, 39 include media literacy, 27 simulations, and 11 include service learning. Many states have also taken advantage of new flexibility under the Every Student Succeeds Act to recommit to civic education and social studies. Accountability policies direct schools to improve on measures to which stakes are attached, and therefore direct resources away from low-stakes subjects. No Child Left Behind held schools accountable for raising math and reading proficiency and graduation rates, right? And, in some sense it was successful, particularly on math scores. But school emphasis on social studies, science, and physical education declined. Under ESSA, 10 states will be holding schools accountable for social studies achievement. 6 states will be holding schools accountable for school climate, and 1 state, Arkansas, will be holding schools accountable for student completion of community service learning credits. Later in the briefing, we'll discuss more how federal student support and academic enrichment grants authorized through Title IV can support civic education. So, while these best practices make clear that civics is not a subject conducive to rote learning, civic education as a course often relies on business as usual practices like lectures, textbook-based readings and assignments and exams. Yet, when politics is at the forefront of the nation's attention, classroom practice changes. In my own research, I looked to see if classroom practice in high school civics and economics classes in North Carolina changed to accommodate the 2008 presidential election. If teachers were to do something different in the context of the election, students should have reported that they did more research, consumed more media, and read primary source materials more, and did not complete worksheets or textbook-based assignments. This was the case. The political context changed classroom practice. Did this change to classroom practice matter for students? Yes, it did. Students who happened to take civics during the 2008 general election campaign increased their participation in community service, politics and student government, and debate as an extracurricular activity in the second half of high school. This was especially true for African American students. But in the short run, students in regular classes performed slightly worse on their end of course exam. Why? Because the knowledge that the exam was testing was not aligned with the good stuff that was happening in the classroom. Almost 1 in 5 questions on that North Carolina civics and economics exam were about historical developments, and only 5% were about current events. There are large gaps between what we expect students and adults to know about the public sphere. In adult surveys of political knowledge, 1/3 of the questions are about current events. Historical processes, none. Civics education courses should focus more than they do now on attentiveness to current events, as well as the skills and knowledge related to reading, discerning, and debating the news and matters of public policy, and less on the histories and functions of government. While equal political participation is a fundamental democratic ideal, it's an ideal unrealized in the United States. Those with more education, more money, more time, more skills, participate more. Those who have less participate less and may be absent from these processes altogether. Civic education, supporting students' engagement with the world, and, as Dr. Hutton said, letting students lead are steps toward equity. And now I very much look forward to hearing about Jack, Sydney, and Devlin's public work. Thank you.
Thank you, Loren. Good morning, and thank you all for joining us here for this briefing on student voice and youth engagement. I'm Robert Motley, principal of Appleton High School in Columbia, Maryland, and Howard County, Maryland. I also serve on the board of directors for the National Association of Secondary School Principals, and I serve as the board liaison to the Student Leadership Advisory Committee as well. Joining me today are 3 members of that committee who are very active in their communities. We have Jack Tucker from Texas, Sydney Neal from Maryland, and Devin Andrews from Rhode Island. So we'll begin with a few questions. I'll start with Jack. Young people and students played a critical role in the 2018 midterm elections. In fact, according to a study from the Center for Information and Research on Civic Learning and Engagement, turnout among young people ages 18 to 29 increased a significant 10% over the last midterm election in 2014. The number of voting young adults has also increased by 18 million in that time. Can you tell us more about why you and many of your peers were so motivated to get involved in 2018? And also, what were some of the civic actions that you participated in and led in your home state of Texas?
All right, hi everyone. So like Robert said, my name is Jack Tucker and I'm from Southlake, Texas. It's in the Dallas area. And I go to Carroll Senior High School where I'm a senior and I serve as the student body president. And additionally, I have been involved with the Texas Association of Student Councils, where last year I served as the state parliamentarian. And to answer your question, Robert, I think one of the simplest ways to express why students are getting more involved is that we are living in an era of change. We're living in a time where it is not unusual to see students leading national movements. It's not unusual to see students here on Capitol Hill advocating for causes that they feel so passionate about that they refuse to stay silent. And one example of that is the March for Our Lives that came as a result of the Marjory Stoneman Douglas shooting in Parkland, Florida. And so we saw this event happen and we saw these students, they were upset and they were angry and they saw an issue that they did not want to see happen again. They did not want to live in a world where things like this were normalized and things like this continued to occur. And so they stood up and they used their voice to make a change. And as a result, there became a national movement with marches all across the country fighting for this cause that all started with a few students from a small town in Florida. And I personally participated in March for Our Lives, and I attended the one in Fort Worth, Texas, where we had about 4,000 to 5,000 students in attendance. And one of the coolest things about this event was that it was completely student organized. It was students from the Dallas-Fort Worth area that put on this event and said, we stand with you and we agree. We are going to use our voice to make a positive change. And I believe that through March for Our Lives and national movements led by students like this, that served to be a reason that there was an increase in youth engagement in the midterm elections in 2018. And I think students started to realize that their voice matters. It's more than just an opinion, it's a way to make change. And a way to make change is to vote and to get involved in the civic process and to not just stay silent, but to use their voice to have a positive influence on their community, their state, and the world around them. And so I think through this, students felt empowered and they wanted to do more than just, they wanted to use their voice to do more than just talk. They wanted to be the ones to make the change rather than just have these ideas. They wanted to turn their ideas into action. And so part of my work during the midterm election, I worked on a voter registration drive within my school. And this drive happened for about 3 weeks up until the registration deadline in Texas. And it was very successful. We actually had about over 100 students in my school register to vote. I don't know how many of them actually went out and voted on election day. I know I did, but I'm hoping it was about 100. Hopefully all 100 of them went out and actually executed their right. But this was something that was a perfect example of students wanting to make a change and get their fellow peers to get more involved. And during the process of getting this voter registration drive approved by my school, my principal actually was very supportive. He was all for letting students help shape the climate and the culture of our school. And part of shaping a great climate and culture of an educational environment is letting students exercise their opinions and letting students feel like what they are thinking matters and feeling validated for fighting for things that they believe in. And so the voter registration drive, it wasn't in support of any specific candidate. It was nonpartisan. It was solely based on getting students to get more involved in the civic process and political systems and government. And that's exactly what it did. And I was very, very proud to be a part of that. And additionally, I was heavily involved in the Texas midterm election, where I was very, very active in supporting a candidate and going to different rallies, marches, and things in his favor. But what I will say is that when I would attend these events, it wasn't just adults, it wasn't just people, it was majority kids my age. It was my generation that was out there listening, educating themselves on the different candidates, and making an opinion based on what they think is right for the future of our country. And it was truly a remarkable thing to see. And I continued to see it throughout the whole election process. And it was through that I became more educated about the two candidates. And when I went on election day to vote, I was confident that I had been given the proper experiences and environments to learn about what I was casting my vote for. And I was very grateful for that opportunity. And I think that wraps it up. Yeah. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Jack. I appreciate that. Sydney, as Jack highlighted, young people were more motivated and active and engaged in electoral politics in 2018. But we know that to affect meaningful policy change, advocacy needs to continue after officials are elected and actually doing the work of legislating. So can you describe some of the efforts you've been involved with in Maryland to advocate on behalf of the issues that matter to you and students in your state?
Good morning. My name is Sydney Neal. I'm a junior at St. Mary's Rayburn in Leonardtown, Maryland, so just an hour and a half south of here. Before I answer your question, Robert, I'd like to touch quickly on something that Jack earlier had mentioned. You talked a little bit about the opportunities and the environment that you experienced in your school. And I think it's incredibly important to note that we are the exception as a committee, not because we have opinions, not because we want to improve our schools and our climates. We're the exception because we were given unique opportunities that should be afforded to all students. I have been blessed with amazing, passionate, and supported educators and advisors that unfortunately is not the norm across the country. And I think that's incredibly important to note that so much of our success as a committee and as individual students is because we experienced a supported learning environment. But to continue to answer your question, I've been heavily involved in the Maryland Association of Student Councils since I was in 6th grade, so 11, 12 years old. I had the most amazing advisors in middle school. They always pushed me. They made me feel validated, as you mentioned. They made me feel like my experiences and my opinions mattered. So the Maryland Association of Student Councils is a student-driven organization. We oftentimes have different leadership trainings that we host, and we also definitely push students into advocacy in our local area and on the federal level. So I've had a lot of amazing opportunities. To note my first one, I was in 6th grade and I took a trip with the Calvert Association of Student Councils to the Maryland General Assembly. I got to meet the president of the Senate. And I just remember sitting in like a dark oak chair with like candles and real candlestick holders, and just being kind of floored at the opportunities that I was given at such an early age. And in those really formative years, I think people often don't see the connection between middle school experiences and high school passions. So that was some, I've been given amazing opportunities, met amazing people. But as an organization, we try to provide those opportunities to the hundreds of students that attend our events. So things that I've been involved in, as now I'm an officer, I serve as the first vice president of our organization. We work to support the Kerwin Commission, which is a commission in Maryland that works to improve public schools. We've had letter writing events where we ask students from across the state to write in support of the commission. We've gone to their meetings. We've had meetings with different legislators to explain to them why the Kerwin Commission is important to us. We have also sent a delegation to the March for Our Lives, as Jack talked about, and as an organization, we did support that movement. And another thing that I'm incredibly proud of is we've had so many students over the years testify in support of Maryland bills that affected youth and education and school climate. So last spring, I was elected as the first vice president of the Maryland Association of Student Councils. And kind of my passion project for the year was the Women's Leadership Forum. It was a collection of about 60 young women and some males as well. And we talked about different issues we experienced in our organization and at home and at school and just in, the climate that we grow up in as a generation. And one of my favorite parts of the event was a social media campaign that we did, because as you know, social media is definitely probably the most prevalent platform for our generation. So we asked girls and boys to go through their camera roll and pick a personal photo that displayed some sort of women's issue that related to them. For some girls and some people, it was eating disorders or sexual assault or the luxury tax on feminine products. And we asked them to post that picture on Twitter or whatever social media platform, include 1 or 2 sentences about the issue and how it related to them, and then tag legislators, asking them to keep this issue in mind as we enter into the next legislative session. So we've also had, as an organization, we've worked to organize many opportunities. We hold an advocacy week every year, where we ask students and counties to send a delegation to the Maryland General Assembly to advocate on more local issues. And we're also actually working with NASSP to possibly plan a federal advocacy day. And I think why this is important, like why student advocacy is so important, is because education is one of the only service industries where the consumers, who are students, don't get to voice their opinion. If we went to McDonald's and everybody didn't like the burger, you kept getting complaints, this isn't working for me, it doesn't taste good, eventually McDonald's would change the burger. How many times do students get to say, this learning environment isn't working for me, the way that you teach this isn't working for me, and then you actually see those changes being implemented? Few to none, I would say. And all these opportunities that I've been given and helped to try to provide for other students, that is when they get to say, this isn't working for me. Maybe they see the change immediately if it's on a local level. Maybe they don't, but they're still given the opportunity to start that conversation. So I hope that answers your question.
It does. I have a lot to think about. Thank you for that. Wow. Devlin, so far, Jack and Sydney have touched on some of the ways that young people are getting involved with advocacy in the civic process outside of school. We also know that civic education opportunities in the classroom are an important part of getting students involved and informed. So what are some of the education policies that are most important to you and other young people today, and how has your civic study in school helped inform your knowledge of those policies?
Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Devin Andrews. I am a senior at Coventry High School in Rhode Island. It's actually the largest high school in the smallest state. We're a school of 1,600, which is about half of our population. Before I answer Robert's question, I do want to agree with what Sydney had to say, and I feel like what schools strive for now is equality. But we need more than equality, because not every student learns the same. Through my experience with NASSP, I've come to learn that it's more of an issue of equity, that students learn differently and they need these different opportunities, and I'll touch on that in a little bit. To answer Robert's question, one policy that I care very much about is the Every Student Succeed Act, specifically Title IV, which is all about the budgeting behind it. Title IV is a flexible program that states and school districts can use for well-rounded education. They can use it for technology implementation in school. Only 20% of that, however, can be used on actual devices, so it's very much training-based. And the other part of it is actually school safety, which we've come to learn, unfortunately, is a very big issue in our world today. When the Every Student Succeed Act was passed, Title IV was appropriated at $1.17 billion, which is an increase. However, we need the full $1.65 billion. As I said before, this new appropriation does give us equal opportunities, but it doesn't give us equitable opportunities. And I can speak on that a little bit actually, because at home I feel like my civics education was somewhat cut short due to budgeting issues. Although I do care a lot about advocacy and the political aspect of things, I've also stepped into the business world and I've taken a care for marketing. I started my own clothing brand and I also have a marketing firm that I manage back at home. And personally, I definitely am missing out on civics education as a result of it. My school lost its business program. We're very much so a vocational school, so there's a lot of students from outside towns that come into my school for different learning opportunities, much of which is actually funded by the Perkins Act and Title IV. And I feel like that because I've been forced to step out of the school environment and to do these internships, I've lost a lot of my civics education. We have a very successful AP history program at my school, and that's the forefront, I'd say, of our civics education program. We have a 98% passing rate, which is the highest in our state for AP history, and it really does give students that platform and that civic engagement background. Teaches them a lot about the political process, which is very important because we otherwise really wouldn't learn about that. However, the issue comes into play with the fact that it's an AP program. Not every student wants to take AP classes, not every student can handle that. And unfortunately, there are caps for these AP programs as well, just because we don't have enough teachers to teach 4 or 5 AP sessions. So with this full appropriation, we'd be able to not only expand our AP program, but also offer regular college prep classes that are open to the regular student. Some things that we've talked about within my own school are offering leadership courses, offering advocacy courses, and even journalism type courses where it just teaches people to take a stand and understand what they believe in. So that's the biggest part of civics education, is it really does give people that foundation of how to become an active advocate. And active advocacy is everything, because you can have a point and you can understand an issue, but to be able to speak on that issue, build on it, and advocate for it is what's important.
Great, thank you, Devin, I appreciate that. So I want to open up a question for all three of you, and you can jump in and answer if you will. But I think one of the most important things, it's very impressive what you all are doing. And so how do each of you feel that your actions or your advocacy has influenced your peers or even adults? Can you talk about that a little bit?
I think student action and advocacy is one of the most critical things in an educational system. And I think my personal work has had an influence on my peers and my school. There is a sense of community in my school that I'm very grateful to have. And through that, I believe that, like through my advocacy work and through my political involvement, that people have started to follow that. And that people are seeing that students can get involved. And I see my peers wanting to get more engaged. I see clubs being started. I see foundations being formed. We actually had 2 students in my school create a political action committee called Backpack that's fully student initiated, and they have chapters in, I believe, 13 states across the country now, originated at my school. So there are students in my school that are willing, they want to get involved. They just need the opportunities, or they just need the validation. And I think a lot of that comes from our upper administrators. And I know, so I'm very active in student council, and I know that if I'm presenting something to my principal, even if he doesn't think it's a good idea, he will listen and he will make me feel validated for sharing my opinion, for having the bravery to speak to an official adult about something that I'm passionate about. And whether or not it's going to happen or not, that's besides the point, is that he is listening and he is giving not just me, but plenty of students in my school opportunities to do something that they're passionate about and shape something that leaves their legacy behind. And I think that it's extremely important.
Another issue where I've seen my peers affected is we actually did advocate for a Rhode Island State history class. We learned through AP history that our state is one of the only, if not the only state that doesn't have a state history museum. So we kept advocating, and we ended up receiving a grant where we now have a Rhode Island State History class. And through this class, we've been working to try and figure out ways where not only we can learn about our state, but figure out a way where we can implement some sort of state museum. And that's the important thing with advocacy. It doesn't have to be about a political point. It could be something like that where you need some sort of forum. And I feel like having a state history museum would be a great example of how we can take not have to take a political stand but still advocate. And that's where, again, the appropriation comes into play, because not all of my peers have this great background on civic education and how the civic process works. So hopefully through a full appropriation, we'll be able to gain the State History Museum through our knowledge in civic education.
I think that my question mirrors Jack's in a way. I think the answer is kind of twofold. Towards adults, I found that when I approach any sort of administrator or adult with a question, whether that be politically oriented or about my school or really anything, I think adults expect me to be really entitled. And I think that there's a difference between being entitled and empowered, and when you can sit down and have a conversation and say, I do have a logical, reasoning to my answer, I'm not demanding something, I simply want to bring something to your attention. Adults that I've experienced often say, wow, not wow, but you can see that they kind of sat down at the table thinking, oh, here's Sydney and just has another problem, or she demands something to change. But there's so many student leaders who can, bring something very valuable to the table. And I think that kind of changes people's opinions towards people our age who do have very valid things to say. And I think towards the student aspect of your question, Robert, the impact that I like to say the impact that I've had is greater than what I've personally done. Through the Maryland Association of Student Councils, I've been able to kind of organize so many opportunities for other students, which I think is so much more important than me going and doing something personally. I only bring one perspective, one set of experiences to the table, but when I can say 60 kids went and spoke to legislators, there were 60 letters written, or 500 people participated in this event, I think that's so much more valuable, and that's probably, I'd like to say, my biggest impact on our peers.
And if I can add something real quick, I think another really important thing about student advocacy is that our students, our generation is empowered. We have a lot to say, and we have a lot of things that we are passionate about, and it is through student advocates that our peers are hearing these things. And for example, last year I led a anti-human trafficking awareness and campaign project statewide across Texas. And it was through that 1,300 schools across Texas were getting human trafficking education. And that's just one example of many initiatives led by students on topics that people may not be as educated about, but are very important to be knowledgeable about. And it's because of these student advocates and student voice that we are hearing these things, and students are getting a greater perspective on different issues and topics, and in turn are becoming passionate about things on their own. And passion really is the driving force of anything. You can't do anything successfully without passion, in my opinion. And these kids have passion. I have passion. Sydney and Devin have passion. Our generation has passion, and I think that's something that is being noticed, and it's very important.
Thank you. So before I get to my next question, I have to say something, and that is, some people wonder, what does the National Association of Secondary School Principals have to do with student engagement and youth empowerment? And I think you've heard today that all of the schools in which these phenomenal young people attend, their principals had some part in allowing them to express their voice. And so our organization is really about empowering students and enhancing student voice and getting them involved and active. And I'll be very honest with you, as a current principal, that's a paradigm shift. Some students, they haven't been given that opportunity, and they don't know how to begin that whole process. And so through this committee, the Student Leadership Advisory Committee, its purpose is really start helping students understand the power that they have and to get them on that track to increasing their voice. So I want to thank you all for that. So my next question, and I'm going to be very honest with you, and I'm sure that my students back at Appleton are really sick and tired of me saying, I work on this committee and these kids are incredible. But when I do go back, one of the things that my students say to me is that I don't have time. Like, I'm in 5 AP courses, I've got, my sports and things. So can you talk to us a little bit about managing your time and how you find time to be these strong student advocates?
Well, my approach is probably a little bit different than most people would assume. I find that it's equally as important to work for all these committees and get our stuff done and be a leader and get homework done as it is to enjoy where we are in high school and like have friendships and go to football games and do birthday parties and stuff like that. I feel that if I didn't have that time to just enjoy the space where I am right now, I'd be a miserable person, and I don't think miserable people are productive. So I think for me it's just a matter of looking at my week and I have this due, but also making sure I have that downtime, which I think is a really critical part of the conversation, that people our age are so driven to do great things and become great things, and I think we forget that we're still high schoolers. Like, we still need to enjoy where we are. We have our whole lives to work, and I don't know. I hope that answers your question.
I can speak on that a little bit more, because through my businesses is honestly how I take part in most of my civic engagement aside from school. Especially with the clothing brand. I've been able to kind of do my research and sneak in these small political messages or just these moving messages within it, whether it be through political cartoons or just cartoons and different designs. So I feel like it doesn't even have to be direct advocacy. It can be these subliminal messages. And then with my marketing firm, a lot of it is knowing how, because obviously politics does affect the economy. So knowing how everything's operating and what's going on, I feel like I've at least been able to educate myself with what's going on, and then I can bring this knowledge back to my school, back to my peers, and that's how we figure out what we want to advocate for and what we're passionate about.
So free time is something that I do not have a lot of. I do theater. I'm in 2 to 3 full productions a year. I'm an assistant editor for my school's newspaper. So I am going. But what I will say is that I have been very lucky to have shaped my high school education to be a curriculum that I chose rather than something that was chosen for me. And so this year as a senior, I am taking 2 student council classes, newspaper, theater, and then I have my English and my statistics class. The rest of my credits, I worked hard my freshman through junior year to get them done, so my senior year I could really focus on what I'm passionate about. And as I'm going into this next chapter of my life, as I go to college, I want to spend more time thinking about my passion. So I blocked in time for myself because I knew I would need it. But time management, I like what Sydney was saying about you need to be a kid. You got to enjoy high school, and I think that's absolutely critical to be a productive human being, a productive student. You have to manage your time, but you also need to know when to let it go. You can't just overwork yourself. And I think, like I said, I am very lucky to have the course load, I guess, this year that I'm taking, but there's a lot of students that will take 6 AP classes and then also be student body president and also be doing all these things and wanting to be an advocate, but they literally do not have enough time because they feel this pressure of all these AP classes, which is something that I personally am not a whole fan of the AP system, but I'm not going to get off on that tangent. So yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Thanks. And so just one last question before we kind of open it up for any questions in the audience here. And that is, you are members of the Student Leadership Advisory Committee. Can you talk about what this experience has been like for you and being a part of this committee?
Yeah, I will be completely honest, this experience has opened my eyes to a lot. I mean, it's completely changed my life. A lot of Rhode Islanders, and I feel like people in general, they become very comfortable with themselves and they're not willing to try these new things and leave where they're comfortable from. And to be able to leave my state and leave my town and understand how the world operates and see how the world works, it's been very eye-opening. And it's been great being able to go home and share this experience with my peers because it shows them that there's a world greater than themselves and greater than Rhode Island. It helps them to see that there are differences that you can make and that every voice really does matter. I feel like people feel like that they don't have a purpose, or people feel like their voices aren't heard, and if anything, this opportunity has really shown that your voice can be heard.
Yeah, so I would agree with Devin on all that. I think the NASSP Student Leadership Advisory Committee has been one of the greatest opportunities of my life. I mean, I'm 18 years old and I'm sitting here on a panel in a Capitol building, a Senate building. And last year we met with senators and legislators and staffers advocating for Title IV. Not a lot of kids get those opportunities. And every day I have to remind myself how grateful I am for those opportunities. And I think, I live and breathe student council and student leadership. I'm actually majoring in leadership in college. So this is my livelihood. But to do it on such a large scale, on a national level, and literally serve as a student voice for student leaders across the nation, but not even student leaders, students across the nation. It's an honor, and it's been a truly life-changing experience, and has really helped educate me on the civic process and the political sphere, and just getting more involved. And it's really helped me figure out what I want to do with my life, what I want to be, and what change I want to make. And so I'm forever grateful for the opportunity, and I've loved serving.
I think the boys kind of hit the nail right on the head, but I don't want to be repetitive, but yeah, I mean, I got similar to what you guys said. I very much get stuck in my Maryland bubble. I get stuck in my school, in my county, in my state, and a lot of times I think student leaders, or at least myself, I get very tunnel visioned. Like, I have these 3 things to do, get it done, and I oftentimes forget that there's so much of a larger world. Like, even within our organization, we do have so much impact, right? But there's so much more that we can be doing, and I mean, DC's in our backyard. And that kind of pushed me to work with NASSP to hopefully be able to organize a federal advocacy day for our state, simply because we're in, like, you know, prime real estate. So yeah, it really opened my eyes to, again, just the larger opportunities that we have, and the larger roles we need to be taking as student leaders.
I want to thank you all, Jack, Sydney, and Devin, for providing us with insight into all the wonderful things you're doing in your states and your impact that you've had, and we really do appreciate that. I'd like to open up for any questions in the audience, if anyone would like to.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Kabatsky with the National Center for Learning Disabilities, and I just wanted to know, thank you for being here, and I just wanted to know how you educate yourselves on political issues and decide where to stand on these issues and which candidates to support, and then if there's any opportunities in your schools to discuss these issues with your peers, if those are facilitated by principals and school leaders or things like that.
So that actually, the second part of your question is something that my school and my student leaders in my school have been talking about a lot. I go to private Catholic school in St. Mary's County, so it's a little bit of a unique situation politically, and because we have the religious aspect. But it was something that student leaders in my school felt very passionate about, that even though we do have this religious affiliation, and historically the place where we're located is very one-sided politically, we did try to create other avenues. So we've started a BSU, a Black Student Union, which we kind of create that open space specifically for students of color to talk about student issues that often do relate to politics and our social climate. And would you mind repeating the first half of your question? I got
How do you research
yes.
issues?
So I'm lucky enough to be surrounded by brilliant people almost all the time. So I think a lot of my research comes from conversations with other people, if that makes sense. For me, I learn best when I'm talking to people and having active conversations. But obviously there is social media and access to all sorts of political background information online. So that's kind of how I educate myself on political positions.
So while I do identify with a certain political party, I do not like to make any decisions just because of that political party. So how I educate myself is literally looking at the ground roots of what that candidate is supporting, what their positions are on literally everything. And I make an educated decision based off of my own personal research. I will say at my school, though, we do have clubs and organizations that do talk about politics. We have a political club that I'm in. We have Little America. We don't have a model UN. I wish we did. But so there's definitely avenues. I wouldn't say it's school-wide, though. It's for those who want to get involved. And I wish it was more of a thing that was discussed respectfully throughout my school. But it's definitely those who are interested have the opportunities, but it's not something that is completely accessible in just in everyday student life.
And then outside of the school environment, some things that I do is I just talk to people. I've come to learn that people are your greatest resource, and that your network is really your net worth. And I feel like asking people what their stance are, or at least asking them what they know, it helps you kind of understand both sides of an argument, and then from there I'm able to make my decisions.
Other questions?
I'm Kate, and I'm in the office of Congresswoman Marcia Fudge, and I am a 20-year veteran teacher, and I was just wondering if there might be, I know that I've made it my work to build relationships with kids and help them realize their passion, and I thought maybe you'd want to take a moment to give a shout out to a teacher, if there is one, who has really helped you realize that passion.
Yes. So my student council advisors, Ms. Sarah Milhorn, Ms. Lindsay Jacobson, and Ms. Stephanie Fuller have all been, and Ms. Terry Ham, who is my state director for the Texas Association of Student Councils, have been the most influential people in my educational career. Solely based because they always supported me and they trusted me. And it was that trust that I think really did it for me. Like, it was knowing that I could walk into my student council class and they would let me do my thing. They trusted that I would keep our council going, they would get our projects going, and it was just such a strong relationship. And beyond that, the support of when I ran for state office, so how my state association works is an advisor has to serve on our board of directors with us. So my advisor had to give up a year of her life traveling across the state of Texas with me. It's a big commitment. And it was for something that I was passionate about and that I wanted to do, and to see her be so selfless in that sense and want to support me because she knew this was something that I cared so much about and I was so passionate about was, I'm just incredibly grateful. And so those teachers, amongst many other teachers, but specifically those, have definitely had an impact on me and how I view education and how I see my teachers. And I think one thing I want to add, as students get older and get to junior, senior year of high school, you start to see teachers more as people than as a figure. And I think that's a really beautiful thing to experience, is seeing your teachers as someone, their job is to educate you, but beyond that, they're a person that you can have a relationship with. And through that relationship, great things can come out of it. So I'm very grateful. Thank you.
So I'm glad you asked that question. Actually, so I'm going to out myself a little bit, but I have some speaker notes, and I wrote Lewis in one of my speaker notes because I meant to talk about it, but so the teacher that I would really comes to mind when you asked that question was my middle school student government advisor, who was also my 6th grade science teacher, Miss Lewis. So she was, when I got into middle school, I was very shy, very uncomfortable with who I was. I felt, you talk too much, you're bossy, you don't talk enough, you're a pushover, that kind of, dilemma that I think is very reflective in a lot of middle school girls. And Miss Lewis was this larger than life, really funny, loud woman, and I looked up to her so much because I think I saw a lot of myself in her, and I think she saw the same. She really took me into her family, she would take me to my SGA events, and she really made sure that I felt that what I had to say mattered, and my experiences as a minority in my school, as a female and as a person of color, were something really incredibly valuable, and that I had a unique set of life experiences that could encourage other students like me to take the opportunities that I had when those aren't always directly offered to us, or we're not always made to feel welcome in those situations. And I mean, I was actually on the phone with her yesterday. That's one of those relationships that I don't think ends when I leave the county or leave the school, and I am more than eternally grateful for her and everything she pushed me to do.
At first, I'd like to really thank you for this opportunity. Teachers are just as big of an aspect to all of this as the students are. I'd like to give a very big shout out to Mr. Matthew Thomas Brissett. He refers to himself in the third person as MTB, so I'd like to shout out MTB. He was my AP history teacher and the foundation of all my civics education, and for hundreds and maybe even thousands of other students from my school. And I'd also like to give a lot of credit to Mr. Michael Hoban, my former high school principal. He was ultimately the one that believed in me and told me that this is something that I could do and something that needs to be done for the greater good. So I appreciate him kind of putting the bug in my ear and believing in me and helping me get here where I'm at today.
I think you raise a really great point that there are our teachers and advisors on the student government and student council and National Honor Society, National Junior Honor Society. They spend countless hours in working with our students and fostering their leadership and development, and so they do deserve that shout out, so thank you for bringing that forward. Other questions?
Hi, my name is Catherine Bradley. I'm with Learning Policy Institute. First off, I just want to thank the students for being here and just using your voice. Sydney, I think you made an excellent point that you three are not the exceptions and that you've been given unique opportunities that should be afforded to all students. So I wanted to just get all three of your opinions and suggestions of how you think school leaders and teachers can use their positions to create opportunities for other students and create these platforms for students who might not be in your positions as student leaders.
I can speak on that a little bit, and I think a lot of it actually comes from not necessarily offering it during the school day, and I think a big part of that would be through different clubs and organizations, especially ones that have these very welcoming and open teachers. I feel like a big part of it, because my after-school community is just as big as the during the school day community, and I think different kind of clubs and different leadership positions within those clubs would help give students that platform. But I feel like just ultimately allotting platforms to students. So I think clubs within a school environment is probably the best bet for that.
I would say that it also stems from, the lack of opportunity stems from a lack of support of advisors and teachers. How many of us have had advisors that are also the track coach and, they run the plays and then they're NHS and NASSP co-advisors and they also have to go home to a family and, they have a life outside of the things that they do for us. And the reason why I think I've been so incredibly lucky is because I came from a school system where all of our teachers and advisors were so heavily supported by our administration and our school board that they had the time and the resources to create those opportunities for us. And I also think that it comes from civic education, how many students literally even know that this is an option. I think that that's also a huge part that's missing from the conversation is students literally are not taught that they have these opportunities, even if they are provided through the schools. We were talking about this last night, how many times do you see a football player sitting up here? It's always the same types of students that get the opportunities. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
So funny enough, in a couple of weeks, my school is actually, my student council is partnering with a local city councilman, Dr. Shafi, on having a political engagement night. And he is giving, anybody is welcome to come after school hours to talk about politics, how to get involved in politics, what he's done with it. He's city councilman, local Republican Party co-chair. So I think things like that, almost like open forum style things, are a great way to get students the opportunities to get involved in civic education. But I think additionally, stuff within school hours is also necessary because kids are very busy. A lot of kids are very involved in multiple things. And so sometimes they may not want to go or have time to go necessarily. When we talked about time management, every kid has their priority list. Something's always at the top, something's always at the bottom. And if this isn't their full passion, maybe at the bottom, doesn't mean it's not necessary. And additionally, I want to add, I was in a program in my city called South Lake Kids Interested in Leadership. And it was a program of 20 high school juniors that we essentially met bi-monthly with our either our mayor, our police chief, our city councilman, city manager, city secretary, all sorts of people that helped run our town essentially. And we got to learn, the whole point of it was to get educated about our local government and how the local civic process works. And then eventually we took a trip to Austin, the state capital, and saw it at the state level and met with state representatives and commissioners and all that. And I think programs like that, essentially, maybe bigger, because ours was a selected 20, but programs for more students like that, that would be a great opportunity to get involved in things like that.
We're reaching the end. Well, one last question before we...
I don't even find out there it is.
Well,
Hi, my name is Spencer. I work on the Civic Engagement team at Young Invincibles. Thank you all for your insights today. I just wanted to see how the state and national advocacy community can better serve you all, especially when it comes to student voting rights and that agenda. What could you use to be better advocates and to do even more?
I think resources. I think a lot of students they have this passion, they don't know how to use it though. They don't know how to be an advocate. So I think, last year we had a whole training on what it means to be an advocate and all this training on how to advocate and all that, which was very great. But again, there's 6 high school students here and 2 middle school students. That's 8 students from across the country. That's it. That got that training from NASSP. So I think more training like that for just students in schools, just more resources and how, if you have, and that's something that you want to advocate for, what are the steps you can do to actually meet with a legislator, meet with a staffer, how to draft up an email, or things like that, just like a little toolbox of advocacy, essentially.
I would say that to be most effective, I wouldn't target us. Like, I wouldn't target this demographic. I think we're incredibly lucky because we have advisors and people who teach us this and train us. Some of us, for me, it's, going on six years of this. But for 99% of my student population in my school, my county, and my state, they don't ever receive these opportunities or the training. And you're missing out on 99% of the people who are eligible to vote. I feel like adults sometimes think that opportunities should only be afforded to kids like us because we're well-spoken and experienced, but like, how is that an accurate representation of the student body and all of the things we have to offer? And so I think we miss out on such a huge part of the conversation, even in a setting like this, because you have 3 students who are incredibly alike. We're from all across the country, but are very, very similar. So I think providing those opportunities or those resources to other students outside of this sort of setting, you make an incredible impact.
Yeah, I'd like to agree with them for sure. And ultimately, it just comes down to education and having those resources. I feel like once you learn about it and you know how to do it, you can take that and manipulate it how you need to. And everyone's going to learn differently, and that's how it does come down to the issue of equality versus equity. But ultimately, the education, I think, would be the best resource. And making this information on how to advocate and how to gain all this knowledge is the sure way of making sure that everyone's voice is heard.
So I want to take this opportunity to thank you all for coming out today and hearing Jack, Sydney, and Devlin, and getting to see what I, as a practicing principal, get to see every day in my school with outstanding young people. Big thank you to Loren as well for coming out and providing some information for us. But again, we are the Student Leadership Advisory Committee, a subset of the National Association of Secondary School Principals, and thank you so much for being here with us today.